Continue to hit Japan today, many measuring a magnitude of 6 or higher. The country is well known for preparations to minimize damage from earthquakes and other natural disasters. So did those precautions help save lives this time? Murat Saatcioglu is an earthquake engineer, professor at the University of Ottawa. He joins me now from Ottawa. So as we see more and more images of the aftermath, how do you think Japan's infrastructure is held up to the worst recorded earthquake to ever hit the island?
Well, Japan has very high standards for building design, and they are in fact leading, along with US, Canada, New Zealand, world in earthquake engineering and design of structures for earthquakes. And the more I look at damaged buildings, the more I see what is there to be expected. For example, in Tokyo, we did not see any significant damage. When we design buildings against earthquakes, we consider 3 performance levels. In the event of a small earthquake, we expect the structures and facilities to be operational during and after, immediately after. And if it's a medium-sized earthquake, we expect the building to survive and perhaps need a little bit of repair work, but put back in use immediately after. But if it's a strong earthquake, the type of earthquake that we've experienced in this case, we do expect some damage. The intent is life safety, so long as people can walk out, so long as the main frame, the skeleton of the building is intact. We do expect some damage in masonry walls, bricks, blocks, and drywalls, suspended ceilings, operational and functional components. So what I have seen so far is in a way to be expected. And it is, with the exception of course, older buildings. And I must add, current Japanese standards is very much up to the standards of modern seismic design codes. But what we have learned in earthquake engineering is the product of the last 3-4 decades. Buildings designed prior to 1970s and 80s would be vulnerable against earthquakes. Brittle buildings would be vulnerable. Non-engineered construction would be vulnerable. So we have seen many of those being damaged. In addition to tsunami damage, of course, that's a different story.
Right. Let me ask you, Murat, you mentioned the building codes there are quite stringent. Do you think that we would have been seeing a much different picture if the building codes were not as high as they are?
I am sure we would, because building codes ensure certain level of safety, certain level of design forces. If you design structures to resist lower forces, obviously they will collapse. And we also ensure ductility, which means being able to flex and deform without failing. And for that, you have to place sufficient reinforcement in right places, and this is what structural engineers do.
So given the scale of this earthquake, do you think that the damage that we would have seen in Tokyo, do you think it would have been far greater?
If the earthquake was closer to Tokyo, you mean?
No, even given where it was. Let's say the building codes were not as stringent as they are. Do you think it would have been devastating there?
Yes, I think there would be more damage. I'm not sure it would be devastating because it's still some 375 kilometers away from the epicenter. Distance is very important in assessing damage potential. But obviously, if buildings in Tokyo were not designed up to current standards, they would have suffered damage.
Let's talk about the power plants. Is it safe to be building nuclear power plants on an area that is so prone to earthquakes?
Power plants are designed yet for even higher standards. There's a very high safety margin, and they're not expected to suffer damage even in seismically active regions if they are designed properly. And I have very little doubt that the structure itself was designed properly. And this is a very unfortunate incident we're living through, and I'm sure this will be a good lesson for nuclear safety for the future. But there are 2 aspects of designing power plants. One of them is the structure itself, the cooling tower, and I believe that survived without any damage. And the other aspect is the equipment and mechanical and electrical components, safety-related issues, piping, pumps, and if there is a problem with any one of those, and this is not a structural issue, but it is operational function components, which can be just as hazardous should they fail, then of course there would be problems of the type that we are seeing.
Right.
I understand they had cooling problems, whether it was simply power outage and they couldn't pump enough water.
That's my understanding, that it is the power outage that's the problem.
Yes. So as you can see, this is not a structural issue,
right.
but it's very much related to failure of the functional components.
Murat, thank you so much for your insights. That's Murat Saatcioglu, an earthquake engineering professor with the University of Ottawa. Well, powerful.